I'm Major Victoria Stone, 38 years old, and after 15 years of service, I earned the Purple Heart for courage under fire. For years, I sent money home, covered mistakes, and tried to hold my family together. But at a public ceremony, my own father stood up and told everyone I'd been discharged for drinking, that I was a useless drunk. That was the moment I made a choice to stop protecting him and to finally protect myself. Have you ever been humiliated by the very person you sacrificed everything for? If so, share your story in the comments. You're not alone. Before I get into what happened, let me know where you're watching from. And if you've ever had to stand up for yourself after being disrespected, hit like and subscribe for more true stories about boundaries and self-respect. What came next might surprise you. I stand in front of the mirror in my dress uniform, adjusting the collar one last time. Major Victoria Stone. It still feels surreal some days, even after 15 years of service. My reflection shows a woman who learned discipline in places my father never understood, not in his harsh words or unpredictable moods, but in the structured world of the military, where effort actually mattered. Growing up as Robert Stone's daughter meant walking on eggshells disguised as solid ground. My father ran a contracting business in town, well respected on the surface. People saw the successful businessman, the guy who showed up to town meetings and bought rounds at the VFW bar. What they didn't see were the nights I'd wait up, 13 years old, making sure he got home safely after those rounds. Or the times I'd quietly call his clients to reschedule when he was too hungover to show up for estimates. My mother, Linda, had perfected the art of looking away. My younger brother Eric learned early to stay quiet and out of the line of fire. I became the fixer without anyone asking me to. When Dad forgot to pay the electric bill because he'd spent the money on something else, I'd babysit extra hours to help cover it. When he'd start an argument at a family dinner, I'd redirect the conversation. It wasn't love that drove me, it was survival instinct. If I could just keep things balanced, maybe we'd all be okay. The military called to me this summer after high school graduation. Not because of patriotism or family tradition, though Dad liked to claim later that he'd inspired my service. I enlisted because I craved structure, predictability, and a place where the rules applied to everyone equally. Basic training was hard, but it made sense. Do the work, get the result. Show up, get recognized. It was revolutionary. My father's reaction was complicated. He liked telling people his daughter was in the army. It gave him something to brag about at the bar. But I could see the resentment building every time I came home on leave, a little more confident, a little more independent. He'd make subtle digs about me thinking I was better than everyone, about the military filling my head with nonsense. When I told him I was applying to officer candidate school, he laughed and said I'd never make it through. I graduated third in my class. The money part still stings when I think about it. For years, I sent a portion of every paycheck home. Not because they asked, but because I knew they needed it. Dad's business had ups and downs, more downs as his drinking got worse. Mom worked part-time at the library, but it wasn't enough. I told myself I was helping my family, being a good daughter. What I was really doing was trying to earn something I'd never get, his approval, his pride, his acknowledgement that I'd become someone worth respecting. I invited them to my commissioning ceremony when I became a second lieutenant. Dad said he'd try to make it, but something came up with the job. Mom sent a card. I invited them when I made captain. They came that time, but Dad spent the reception telling my fellow officers stories about what a handful I'd been as a teenager, embellishing and outright inventing details that made me sound difficult and rebellious. I smiled through it, made excuses for him later. He'd had a few drinks. He didn't mean it the way it sounded. Eric called me sometimes, usually when he needed something, advice about college, help with a car repair bill. I never minded helping him. He was caught in the same trap I'd escaped, and part of me felt guilty for leaving him there. But Eric had made his peace with Dad's behavior in a way I never could. He'd learned to laugh at the mean jokes, to nod along when Dad rewrote history, to accept that this was just how things were. I couldn't do that anymore, but I didn't know how to change it either. The imbalance in our family wasn't something I recognized all at once. It built gradually, like water damage behind a wall. I'd call home and listen to Dad complain about his business, his health, the neighbors, the government. I'd offer solutions, encouragement, support. He'd dismiss everything I said, then call me a week later with the same complaints. If I mentioned something good happening in my career, he'd change the subject or find something wrong with it. Got selected for a training program? Must not have had much competition. Received a commendation? They hand those out like candy these days. Mom never intervened. In her mind, keeping the peace meant letting Dad say whatever he wanted while the rest of us absorbed it. She'd call me separately sometimes, apologizing for him in vague terms. You know he doesn't mean it. He's under a lot of stress. That's just his way. I'd accept her explanations because I wanted to believe them. I wanted to believe that underneath all the criticism and dismissiveness, my father actually cared about me. But care isn't just a feeling, it's actions, consistency, showing up. And my father never showed up, not really. Even when he was physically present, he was absent in all the ways that mattered. He didn't ask about my life unless it gave him material for his own stories. He didn't celebrate my successes unless he could claim credit for them. He didn't support me through hard times because he was too busy manufacturing his own drama. I gave loyalty when I got none in return. I gave respect when I received contempt. I gave financial support when I barely had enough for myself. I gave time, energy, emotional labor, always hoping this would be the moment when he'd finally see me clearly. When he'd finally say he was proud. When he'd finally acknowledge that his daughter had built a life and career that mattered. It never came. Instead, with each promotion, each achievement, each step forward, the gap between us widened. Not because I was pulling away, I kept reaching back, kept trying to maintain the connection. But my father couldn't tolerate my growth. Every success of mine highlighted something he perceived as his own failure. So he did what he'd always done. He made me small again, or tried to. He'd found that words could be weapons, that rumors could be ammunition, that he could tear down what he couldn't build himself. I should have seen it coming. Looking back now, all the signs were there, bright red flags I'd trained myself to ignore. But I kept believing that blood meant something, that family was supposed to be different, that surely there was a limit to how far he'd go. I was wrong about all of it. The shift started around the time I made major. It was a significant promotion, one I'd worked hard for, and it came with increased responsibilities and visibility. I was proud of it in a quiet way. I'd called home to share the news, and Dad's first response was, "So you're a paper pusher now?" I'd laughed it off. "There's still plenty of fieldwork, Dad. Leadership doesn't mean sure. Whatever they need to tell you to keep you happy at a desk." It was a small thing. I'd heard worse from him over the years. But it was the beginning of a new pattern. At the local 4th of July barbecue that summer, I overheard him talking to some of his friends. I'd just arrived and was heading toward where he stood with a group of guys from his contracting crews. "That's my daughter," he was saying as I approached, and for one naive second I thought he might be saying something kind. "Made major," she tells me. Honestly, I think she just got lucky. Right place, right time. You know how it is with these things, it's not always about skill. His friend noticed me and cleared his throat. Dad turned, saw me, and didn't even have the grace to look embarrassed. "Hey, there she is. We were just talking about you." Like he'd been paying me compliments instead of undermining everything I'd worked for. I kept my voice level. "Hi, Dad. Nice to see you too." The pattern continued. At family dinners, he'd find ways to diminish my work. When I mentioned preparing troops for deployment, he'd say it couldn't be that different from managing a construction crew. When I talked about tactical training, he'd joke that it sounded like expensive summer camp. Nothing I did was impressive enough, difficult enough, real enough. But it was the drinking comments that really started to bother me. It began so subtly I almost didn't notice. I'd be at their house, filling a glass with water from the tap, and he'd say something like, "Thirsty again? That's our Victoria." Or I'd decline a beer at a cookout and he'd stage whisper to whoever was nearby, "She's pacing herself today." The implications were absurd. I barely drank, maybe a glass of wine at holidays, occasionally a beer on a rare night out. Growing up watching Dad's relationship with alcohol had made me cautious. But he was planting seeds, crafting a narrative. My mother would give him sharp looks when he made these comments, but she never confronted him directly. Eric would laugh uncomfortably, playing along because that was easier than pushing back. At the VFW, where Dad was a regular despite never having served himself, he'd found an audience. I heard about it from Colonel Hayes, my mentor, who happened to be there one evening. "Your father was holding court at the bar," Hayes told me carefully, "making some interesting claims about your service." I felt my stomach drop. "What kind of claims?" Hayes hesitated. "He suggested you'd had problems with alcohol, that the military had concerns." He didn't say anything directly actionable, but the implications were clear. My face went hot with anger and humiliation. "That's completely false. I know that. Anyone who knows you knows that. But Stone, you might want to address this before it spreads further." I called Dad that night. Kept my voice calm, professional. "I heard you've been talking about me at the VFW. About drinking. Can't a father worry about his daughter? I've seen you stressed. You come from a family with addiction issues, I'm allowed to be concerned." The gaslighting was masterful. He'd reframed his malicious gossip as paternal concern. "I don't have addiction issues, and you're not concerned. You're spreading lies. I'm telling people what I've observed. Maybe if you came home more often instead of playing soldier, you'd know what people think." I ended the call before I said something I'd regret. But the damage was expanding. Over the next few months, I'd run into people in town who'd give me sympathetic looks or ask how I was doing in voices heavy with meaning. The rumor had taken root. Victoria Stone had a drinking problem. Her own father said so. Must be true. The cruelty of it amazed me. He'd taken his own struggle with alcohol and projected it onto me, weaponizing the very thing I'd protected him from for years. All those times I'd covered for him, made excuses, helped him save face, and this was what I got in return. At my mother's birthday dinner that fall, things came to a head. The whole family was there, plus a few of Mom's friends. I'd brought a nice bottle of wine as a gift and poured Mom a glass. I was drinking water myself, I was driving, and had an early morning the next day. Dad watched me fill my glass from the tap and said, loud enough for everyone to hear, "Smart girl. Sticking to water tonight. Wish you'd always been so careful." Mom's friend Janet looked confused. I saw Eric stare hard at his plate. Linda touched Dad's arm, a warning gesture, but he shook her off. "I'm just saying what we all know. Victoria can't handle stress without a bottle. Never could. It's why she ran off to the military, figured they'd keep her in line." The table went silent. I set down my water glass slowly, deliberately. My voice, when I spoke, was quiet but clear. "That's not true, Dad. Not any part of it." He leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, that familiar smug expression on his face. "Your mother and I have discussed it plenty. Haven't we, Linda?" My mother looked like she wanted to disappear through the floor. "Robert, maybe we shouldn't what? Tell the truth about our own daughter? She's family. We're allowed to be honest." I could have confronted him fully then. Could have laid out every instance of his drinking, his irresponsibility, his failures. But Mom's birthday dinner wasn't the place. And some part of me still hoped this was an aberration, that he'd wake up tomorrow and realize how far he'd gone. The invitation to the town ceremony arrived in March, formal letterhead from the mayor's office. They were hosting a recognition event for local veterans, and I'd been nominated for the Purple Heart following an incident 6 months earlier. The memory of it was still fresh, the explosion, the chaos, pulling 2 of my soldiers to safety before I'd realized I was hurt. The recovery had been long. My legs still ached when it rained. I stared at the invitation for a long time, debating whether to tell my family. Part of me wanted them there. Despite everything, some stubborn part of me still hoped that maybe this would be different. This was significant. The Purple Heart wasn't just another promotion or commendation. This was recognition for being wounded in combat, for courage under fire. Surely even Dad couldn't diminish this. Colonel Hayes thought I was making a mistake. "You don't need them there," she said when I mentioned it. "You've got your unit, your fellow service members. That's your real family." But I couldn't let go of the idea that maybe, finally, my father would show up and be proud. So I called home and told them about the ceremony. Mom was excited, said she'd make sure they all came. Eric congratulated me warmly. Dad's response was measured. "That's good, Victoria. Real good. We'll be there." The ceremony was scheduled for a Saturday afternoon in late April at City Hall. I arrived early in my dress uniform, medals polished, shoes gleaming. The room was already filling with people, other veterans and their families, local officials, community members. Mayor Caldwell greeted me warmly, shaking my hand and thanking me for my service. There was a formal program printed up, listing the honorees. My name was there, Major Victoria Stone, Purple Heart recipient. My family arrived 20 minutes before the ceremony was set to begin. I saw them come in, Mom in a nice dress, Eric in slacks and a button-down, Dad in his usual jeans and a polo. He looked uncomfortable, out of place among the formal atmosphere. I went over to greet them. "Thanks for coming," I said, and I meant it. Mom hugged me. "We wouldn't miss it, honey. We're so proud of you." Dad nodded, but didn't say anything. His jaw was tight. I recognized the look. He'd been drinking, not a lot, but enough to sharpen his edges. My stomach tightened with worry, but I told myself he'd behave. This was too important. Even he wouldn't cause a scene at something like this. I was wrong. The ceremony hadn't officially started yet. People were mingling, making small talk. I was speaking with another honoree, a Navy veteran I'd known from previous community events, when I heard my father's voice carrying across the room. "You know she didn't leave the service with honor, right? They kicked her out for drinking." I turned, my blood going cold. He was talking to a group of people I didn't recognize, probably friends of other honorees. They looked uncomfortable, unsure how to respond. Dad continued, warming to his audience. "I know she's in uniform today, but that doesn't tell the whole story. She's always had a problem with alcohol. The military finally had enough." I started toward him, but Colonel Hayes caught my arm. She'd come to support me, in civilian clothes, but unmistakably military in her bearing. "Stone, don't. Let him hang himself." But I couldn't just stand there. "Dad," I said, reaching the group. "Can I talk to you for a minute?" He looked at me, and I saw something ugly in his eyes. This wasn't just the alcohol talking. This was intentional. "Just telling these folks the truth, Victoria. They should know who they're honoring today." The people he'd been talking to excused themselves quickly, embarrassed to be part of this. But Dad wasn't done. He moved to another group, and I heard him repeat the same lies. Then another group. He was working the room methodically, poisoning the well. Mayor Caldwell approached, his expression grave. "Major Stone, is there a problem?" I didn't know how to explain that my own father was sabotaging my moment without sounding pathetic. "I apologize for the disruption, sir. Family issues." "I see." The mayor glanced at where my father was now talking to yet another cluster of people. "Perhaps we should begin the ceremony. That might settle things." I nodded gratefully. The mayor signaled to his staff, and people began taking their seats. I sat in the front row with the other honorees. My family sat 3 rows back. I could feel Dad's presence like a weight on my shoulders. Mayor Caldwell welcomed everyone and began speaking about the importance of recognizing those who'd served. He talked about sacrifice and courage. The room was respectfully quiet. Then he began the individual recognitions, calling each veteran forward, reading their citations, presenting their awards. As my name approached, I braced myself. I didn't know what Dad might do, but I knew he wasn't finished. The mayor called me forward. "Our next honoree is Major Victoria Stone, a 15-year veteran of the United States Army." I stood, began walking toward the podium. And then I heard it. Dad's voice, loud and clear, cutting through the formality. "She's always been a useless drunk. Don't let that uniform fool you." The room went deadly silent. Every head turned. I stopped walking, frozen mid-step. I could see my mother's face, white with shock. Eric had his head in his hands. The mayor's expression was stunned. For a long moment, no one moved. Then Mayor Caldwell's face hardened. He looked directly at my father. "Sir, I'm going to have to ask you to leave." "I'm just telling the truth," Dad said, but his voice had less conviction now. He could sense the room turning against him. "Security," the mayor called, and 2 officers moved toward my father. Mom was pulling at his arm, whispering urgently. After a tense moment, Dad stood and walked out, Mom, and Eric trailing behind him. The door closed. The silence stretched. I stood there in front of everyone, humiliated, angry, hurt in ways I couldn't begin to process. Mayor Caldwell cleared his throat. "Major Stone, please join me." I walked the rest of the way to the podium on shaking legs. The mayor picked up the proclamation, his voice strong and deliberate. "For courage under fire and wounds sustained in combat operations," he read, looking directly at me, then out at the assembled crowd, "the Purple Heart is awarded to Major Victoria Stone, who on October 14th of last year, during a hostile attack on her unit's position, sustained injuries while successfully extracting 2 wounded soldiers from immediate danger, displaying extraordinary heroism and selfless dedication to her troops." He pinned the medal to my uniform. The room erupted in applause. People stood, a standing ovation that went on and on. Through the blur of my vision, I could see the faces: respect, admiration, support. These people, strangers mostly, believed in me more than my own father did. I saluted the mayor. He saluted back, then shook my hand. "Thank you for your service, Major. And I apologize for that disruption." "It's not your fault, sir." But as I returned to my seat, the medal heavy on my chest, all I could think was that my father had stood in this room and tried to destroy me in front of an entire community. And part of me had almost believed he wouldn't. The reception after the ceremony was torture. People approached me with congratulations, but I could see the questions in their eyes. Some of them had heard what my father said. Others had clearly noticed the disruption even if they hadn't caught the words. I smiled, thanked them, made polite conversation while inside I was screaming. Colonel Hayes stayed close, running interference when she could. "You did well up there," she told me quietly. "Kept your composure." I wanted to disappear. "I know. But you didn't. That takes its own kind of courage." My mother called my phone 3 times during the reception. I let it go to voicemail. Eric texted, "I'm so sorry. Call me when you can." I didn't respond. I wasn't ready to hear excuses or explanations. I just wanted to get through the rest of this event without falling apart. During the reception, I noticed people keeping their distance from the spot where my family had been sitting. A few folks who'd witnessed the scene were talking in low voices, casting glances my way. The story was spreading. By tomorrow, everyone in town would know that Robert Stone had publicly humiliated his decorated daughter at a military honors ceremony. I left as soon as it was socially acceptable, still in my uniform, the Purple Heart in its case tucked under my arm. I drove back to my apartment and sat in my car for 20 minutes before I could make myself go inside. Once there, I carefully removed my uniform, hung it up, and put on civilian clothes. Then I sat on my couch and stared at the wall. The worst part wasn't the public humiliation. It wasn't even the lies he'd told. The worst part was that I'd known better and invited them anyway. I'd let hope override experience. I'd believed that blood and family meant something when years of evidence had proven otherwise. My phone buzzed. Colonel Hayes, checking in. "You okay?" I typed back, "No. But I will be. Want company?" "Not tonight. But thank you." I made myself eat something, though I couldn't have said what. Then I sat down with my laptop and did what I should have done months ago. I started making notes. Every instance of his sabotage, every lie, every undermining comment. I documented it clinically, like writing a military report. It helped to see it laid out in black and white. This wasn't a loving father having a bad day. This was a pattern of deliberate harm spanning years. The next morning, I called Colonel Hayes and asked if we could meet. She came to my apartment within the hour, took one look at my face, and made coffee without asking. "I need to talk through something," I told her. "I'm listening." I laid it all out, the years of criticism, the financial support I'd provided, the spreading lies about my drinking, and finally yesterday's public attack. Hayes listened without interrupting, her expression growing grimmer. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "How long have you been letting him do this to you?" "My whole life, I guess. But it's gotten worse as I've advanced in my career. Because you're succeeding in ways he never did. You're achieving things he can't claim credit for or control. So he's trying to tear you down." I nodded. Hearing someone else say it made it feel more real, less like I was overreacting or being too sensitive. What do you want to do about it? Hayes asked. I don't know. Part of me wants to call him and scream. Part of me wants to never speak to him again. Part of me still wants to fix it somehow. You can't fix someone who doesn't think they're broken. And Victoria, your father doesn't think he's done anything wrong. Did you see his face yesterday? He wasn't ashamed. He was angry that you were getting recognition. She was right. In that moment before security had escorted him out, Dad had looked furious, not embarrassed. He'd believed he was justified. So what do? I asked. You set boundaries. Real ones. And you accept that setting them might mean losing the relationship entirely. The thought made my chest ache. Despite everything, he was still my father. But Hayes was right. I'd spent my entire adult life trying to earn his respect, his pride, his basic acknowledgement of my worth. It was never going to happen. He was incapable of giving me what I needed. Over the next few days, I learned just how badly Dad's stunt had played in town. My mother's friend Janet called to apologize for being at the dinner where Dad had made those first public comments. I should have said something. I should have defended you. It's not your responsibility, Janet. Still, what he did at the ceremony, Robert, that was beyond the pale. People are talking. People were indeed talking. I heard through various channels that Dad's reputation had taken a serious hit. The guys at the VFW, many of them veterans themselves, were appalled. The mayor had apparently told several people that Robert Stone was no longer welcome at city events. Even some of Dad's contracting clients were quietly distancing themselves. For once, there were consequences for his behavior. He couldn't charm his way out of this or rewrite the narrative. Too many people had witnessed it firsthand. Eric called me finally, and I answered. Vic, I don't know what to say. I'm ashamed to be related to him right now. It's not your fault, Eric. I should have stopped him. Before the ceremony even started, when he began talking to people, I should have gotten him out of there. You're not responsible for managing Dad's behavior. None of us are. Mom's a wreck. She can't believe he did that. I felt a flicker of anger. She can't believe it? Eric, she's watched him undermine me for years and never said a word. I know. She knows that too, I think. She's been crying a lot. I don't have sympathy to spare for Mom right now. She's an adult who made choices. Eric was quiet. Then, what are you going to do? I'm going to set some boundaries. Starting with Dad not being welcome at any future events in my life. He's going to lose it. That's his problem, not mine. After we hung up, I sat with that statement. It was freeing in a way I hadn't expected. His reactions, his feelings, his rage, none of it was my responsibility. I'd spent so long trying to manage his emotions, to keep him happy or at least prevent him from exploding. I was done. I waited 3 days before calling my father. 3 days to make sure I was calm, that I'd thought through what I wanted to say. When I finally dialed his number, my hand was steady. He answered on the second ring. Victoria. Dad. We need to talk about what happened at the ceremony. I was just trying to, no. You don't get to explain or justify. I'm going to talk, and you're going to listen. Silence. I could picture his face, that familiar expression of outrage at being challenged. What you did was unforgivable, I continued. You stood in front of my community, my fellow veterans, and told lies designed specifically to humiliate me on what should have been a proud moment. This wasn't a slip-up or poor judgment. This was deliberate cruelty. You don't understand the pressure I've been under. I don't care about your pressure. I don't care about your excuses. Here's what's going to happen. You will not attend any future ceremonies, promotions, or events involving my military service. You've lost that privilege permanently. His voice rose. You can't bar me from I can and I am. If you show up, I'll have security remove you. I'll make it clear to organizers in advance that you're not welcome. I'm done giving you opportunities to sabotage me. After everything I've done for you? I'm your father. The audacity of it stunned me. Everything you've done for me? Dad, I've been financially supporting you for years. I've covered for your mistakes, made excuses for your behavior, and tried desperately to earn your approval. And what have you done? You've criticized every achievement, spread lies about me, and systematically tried to undermine my career and reputation. That's not how I see it. I don't care how you see it. This is how it is. You're entitled to your feelings, but you're not entitled to me. Not anymore. You're being disrespectful. No. I'm setting boundaries. There's a difference. I heard him breathing heavily on the other end. Your mother isn't going to like this. Then Mom can call me herself and we'll discuss her role in enabling your behavior for all these years. You can't turn the family against me. I'm not turning anyone against you. You did that yourself. I'm just protecting myself from future harm. Fine, he said, and his voice had gone cold. Fine. You want to cut me off? Go ahead. But don't come crying to me when you need something. I haven't needed anything from you in years, Dad. That's part of the problem. This relationship has been one-sided for a long time. I hung up before he could respond. My heart was racing, but I felt clearer than I had in days. I'd said what needed to be said. No yelling, no accusations beyond the facts, just calm, firm boundaries. Within an hour, my mother called. Victoria, what did you say to your father? He's furious. I told him he's not welcome at my military events anymore. You can't do that. He's your father. Mom, he publicly humiliated me. He told a room full of people that I was dishonorably discharged for drinking. At a ceremony where I was receiving the Purple Heart. He didn't mean it that way. He's been stressed, and he worries about you. Stop. My voice was sharper than I'd intended. Stop making excuses for him. You've been doing it my entire life, and I'm done accepting it. I'm trying to hold this family together. By sacrificing me? By letting Dad treat me however he wants while you stay silent? That's not holding a family together, Mom. That's enabling abuse. She gasped. Abuse? That's a strong word. It's an accurate word. And you've participated by never standing up for me, never telling him his behavior was wrong, always asking me to be patient, to understand, to accommodate his moods and lies. I didn't know what else to do. You could have chosen me. Just once, you could have chosen to protect your daughter instead of protecting his ego. Mom was crying now. I'm sorry. I didn't realize you did realize. You just decided it was easier to let me absorb his cruelty than to confront him about it. What do you want from me, Victoria? It was a fair question. I thought about it carefully. I want you to acknowledge that what he did was wrong. Not stress, not a misunderstanding, wrong. And I want you to respect my boundaries. If I say Dad's not welcome somewhere, I need you to support that, not try to sneak him in or guilt me into changing my mind. I'll try, she said quietly. Trying isn't enough anymore. Either you do it or you don't. We ended the call without resolving anything, really. But I'd said my piece. What my mother did with it was up to her. Eric texted later that evening. Dad's on a rampage. Calling everyone, trying to get them to talk sense into you. Just wanted to warn you. I wasn't surprised. Dad had always been skilled at rallying support, at making himself the victim. I wondered how well it would work this time, given that so many people had witnessed his behavior at the ceremony. Over the next week, I got calls from extended family. My Aunt Rachel tried the gentle approach. Maybe you're being a little hard on your father? He's not perfect, but he loves you. Love is more than a feeling, Aunt Rachel. It's actions and respect. Dad has shown me neither. My Uncle Tom was more direct. Your father says you've cut him off. That's not right, Victoria. Family is family. Then maybe Dad should have remembered that before he tried to destroy my reputation in front of the whole town. Tom was quiet. Then, I heard about what happened at the ceremony. That was not good. No, it wasn't. But he's still your father. And I'm still his daughter. But that doesn't mean I have to accept mistreatment. Some relatives took my side. My cousin Jennifer, who'd had her own struggles with the family dynamics, called to offer support. Good for you for standing up to Uncle Robert. He's needed someone to push back for years. But others sided with Dad, or at least with the idea that I should keep trying, keep forgiving, keep subjecting myself to his behavior because of some abstract notion of family loyalty. I held firm. Every conversation, every guilt trip, every attempt to make me the problem, I met with the same calm boundary. I wasn't cutting off the entire family. I was protecting myself from one person who'd proven he couldn't be trusted with my dignity. The hardest part was accepting that my father might never change. That he might go to his grave believing he'd done nothing wrong, that I was the problem, that I disrespected and abandoned him. Part of me still wanted to fix it, to find the magic words that would make him understand and apologize and become the father I'd always needed. But that father didn't exist. He never had. I'd been chasing a fantasy while the real man poisoned my life bit by bit. My father didn't accept the boundaries quietly. About 2 weeks after our phone call, I started hearing through the town grapevine that he was telling people I'd abandoned him, that I'd turned my back on family after everything he'd done for me. The irony would have been funny if it weren't so painful. At the VFW, according to Colonel Hayes, who still had connections there, Dad tried to hold court like usual. But the reception was notably cooler. Some guys ignored him. Others confronted him directly about what he'd done at the ceremony. One veteran, a Korean War vet named Bill whom I'd met a few times, apparently told Dad to his face, "What you did to that girl was disgraceful. You ought to be ashamed." Dad's response, according to the story that got back to me, was to double down. He insisted he'd been trying to protect the military's reputation by exposing the truth about me. That I'd fooled everyone, but he knew the real story. It played poorly. People started leaving when he began talking. His audience dried up. His business took a hit too. Not catastrophically, but noticeably. A few clients quietly moved their projects to other contractors. When Dad asked why, they gave vague reasons about schedules or budgets, but the message was clear. Nobody wanted to work with someone who'd so publicly betrayed his own daughter. Mom called occasionally, tentative conversations where she tried to feel out whether I was softening. I wasn't. I loved my mother, but I couldn't pretend the past decades hadn't happened. She'd made her choices, and they'd included looking away while Dad systematically undermined me. "How long are you going to keep this up?" she asked during one call. "As long as necessary." "This isn't a punishment, Mom. It's self-preservation. Your father misses you. He misses having someone to criticize and control." That's not the same thing. At family gatherings, Thanksgiving was approaching, the tension was obvious. I'd made it clear, any event Dad attended, I wouldn't. Eric tried to broker peace. "Maybe you could both come and just avoid each other?" "That's not a boundary, Eric. That's me making myself smaller so Dad doesn't have to face consequences." Thanksgiving ended up split. Mom and Dad had their traditional dinner. Eric went there. I spent the day with Colonel Hayes and some other officers who didn't have family nearby. It was different, but it wasn't worse. Actually, eating a meal without waiting for someone to insult me was refreshing. The town Christmas ceremony rolled around, another veterans recognition event. I was invited to speak about military service. The mayor's office made sure I knew, without having to ask, that Robert Stone would not be on the guest list. The relief I felt confirmed I'd made the right choice. I spoke to a packed auditorium about discipline, service, and the meaning of honor. Afterward, people came up to shake my hand, thank me. Several mentioned, carefully, that they admired how I'd handled that situation back in April. One older woman, someone's grandmother, took both my hands in hers and said, "Sometimes the bravest thing we do is protect ourselves from people who should have protected us." I nearly cried. Word got back to me that Dad watched the ceremony on the local cable access channel that broadcast it. He called Eric afterward, ranting about how I was turning everyone against him, how I was being vindictive and cruel. Eric, to his credit, apparently told Dad that maybe he should think about why Victoria would need to protect herself from her own father. According to Eric, Dad hung up on him. They didn't speak for 2 weeks. I was changing, growing into someone I hadn't been before. Without the constant weight of managing Dad's feelings and defending myself against his attacks, I had energy for other things. I threw myself into my work, mentoring younger officers, particularly women who were navigating the challenges of military leadership. I started therapy to process the years of undermining and emotional manipulation. My therapist had a term for what I'd experienced: complex emotional abuse. Hearing it named helped. "You spent your whole life trying to earn something that was never going to be given," my therapist said during one session. "Your father isn't capable of the kind of recognition and pride you needed from him." Not because you're not worthy, but because he's broken in ways that prevent him from seeing your worth. I knew it intellectually, but accepting it emotionally took longer. The local newspaper did a profile on me for Veterans Day, talking about my service and recovery from my injury. They mentioned the Purple Heart ceremony, but gracefully avoided the dramatic parts. When the article came out, I received dozens of messages from people in town, some I knew, some I didn't, expressing support and gratitude. My father was not mentioned in the article at all. I hadn't talked about my family when the reporter interviewed me. I'd focused on my military career, my soldiers, the meaning of service. Dad's absence from my story was noticeable. I wondered if he'd read it, if it bothered him that I'd literally written him out of my narrative. Mom mentioned it when she called. That was a nice article. Dad didn't like that you didn't mention us. I'm sure he didn't. Victoria, he's getting older. His health isn't great. Don't you think he should have considered that before he tried to destroy my reputation? Mom, I will not set myself on fire to keep him warm. Not anymore. She sighed. You sound so hard now. I sound like someone who finally learned to protect herself. There's a difference. What my mother called hardness was actually boundaries. Clarity. A refusal to accept unacceptable treatment just because it came from family. I wasn't cold or cruel, I still cared about my parents in an abstract way. But I no longer believed that caring meant subjecting myself to harm. By the time spring arrived, a year after the ceremony incident, the situation had settled into a new normal. I had minimal contact with my father, none directly, just occasional updates from Eric or Mom. I maintained a cautious relationship with my mother, though it was strained by her continued loyalty to Dad and refusal to fully acknowledge her role in enabling him. Eric and I stayed close. He'd started setting some boundaries of his own with Dad, which I was proud of him for. My career continued to flourish. I was being considered for a position at the Pentagon, a significant opportunity. Colonel Hayes, who'd become not just a mentor but a genuine friend, told me I was a strong candidate. You've got the skills, the experience, and the leadership qualities they're looking for. I allowed myself to be excited about it without immediately wondering what Dad would say or do to undermine it. That alone felt like progress. The call came on a Tuesday afternoon. I was in my office reviewing training protocols when my phone buzzed with my mother's number. I almost didn't answer. We'd fallen into a pattern of brief, surface-level conversations once every few weeks, and I wasn't in the mood. But something made me pick up. Victoria. Her voice was shaky. Your father's in the hospital. He had a heart attack this morning. My stomach dropped despite everything. Is he stable? He's in the ICU. They're running tests. The doctors are saying it's serious. I'm sorry, Mom. That's scary. Can you come? He's been asking for you. There it was. The guilt hook, perfectly cast. I closed my eyes and took a breath. Mom, I don't think that's a good idea. He's your father. He's in the hospital. Her voice broke. Please, Victoria. For me. I thought about it. Weighed my boundaries against the reality of the situation. I'll come to see you. To support you. But I'm not making any promises about seeing Dad, especially if he's going to use the opportunity to continue the same patterns. He won't. He's different right now. Vulnerable. Vulnerable. The word gave me pause. I'd never thought of my father as vulnerable. He'd always been so aggressively confident, so domineering. But maybe facing mortality changed things. I'll drive up this evening, I told her. The hospital was 2 hours away. I made the drive in a fog of complicated emotions. Part of me hoped this would be a turning point, that facing death would give Dad some perspective. Part of me knew better than to hope for that. And part of me felt guilty for even thinking about it in those terms when my father was seriously ill. Mom met me in the waiting room outside the ICU. She looked exhausted, aged years since I'd last seen her. We hugged, and she held on longer than usual. Thank you for coming. How is he? Stable for now. They did an emergency procedure, put in some stents. But the damage to his heart, they're saying his recovery will be long. Eric arrived about an hour later. The three of us sat in the waiting room, making awkward small talk, avoiding the elephant in the room, the fact that our family had been fractured for the past year and this crisis didn't magically fix that. Finally, a nurse said Dad was asking to see me. I looked at Mom, at Eric, then nodded. Okay. The ICU was quiet, machines beeping softly. Dad was in a bed by the window, looking smaller than I'd ever seen him. He had an oxygen tube, multiple IVs, monitors attached to his chest. His face was pale, drawn. When he saw me, something flickered in his eyes. Victoria. Dad. I stayed near the door, not approaching the bed. They tell me I almost died. I'm glad you didn't. He was quiet for a moment. I wanted to say, the things I said at that ceremony. That wasn't right. My heart rate picked up. Was this actually happening? No, it wasn't. I was angry. You were getting recognition and I felt small. That's not an excuse. It's just the truth. It was the closest thing to an apology I'd ever gotten from him. Thank you for saying that. Can we try again? I know I messed up. A lot. But I'm your father and I'd like a chance to do better. I wanted to believe him. God, I wanted to believe him. But I'd spent too many years learning that promises made in crisis often evaporated once the crisis passed. Dad, I appreciate you acknowledging what happened. But rebuilding trust takes time. It takes consistent changed behavior, not just words in a hospital bed. His expression hardened slightly, just for a second, and I recognized it, the old anger at being challenged, and not getting what he wanted immediately. But then he seemed to catch himself, and his face softened again. Fair enough. I understand. I hope your recovery goes well. I really do. But I need you to understand that moving forward, if we have a relationship, it's going to look different. There will be boundaries, and you'll need to respect them. What kind of boundaries? Like not talking about me to other people unless it's respectful. Not showing up uninvited to my events. Taking responsibility when you hurt me instead of making excuses. Actually acting like you're proud of my achievements instead of trying to diminish them. He looked away, toward the window. You make it sound like I was some kind of monster. I make it sound like you hurt me repeatedly, and I'm no longer willing to pretend it didn't happen. Your mother says you've cut me off. I set boundaries to protect myself. You're the one who chose not to respect them. We sat in tense silence. Finally, Dad said, I'm tired. Maybe we can talk more later. Translation. He was done with this conversation now that it wasn't going the way he wanted. Some things, apparently, didn't change even in the face of mortality. Get some rest, I told him, and left the room. Mom was hovering in the hallway. How did it go? He apologized, sort of. Then got defensive when I said rebuilding trust would take time and changed behavior. He's trying, Victoria. He said words he thought I wanted to hear. Whether he meant them or will follow through remains to be seen. Mom looked disappointed in me, like I was being unreasonably harsh. But I'd learned not to accept the bare minimum just because it was slightly better than nothing. My father survived the heart attack and spent 2 weeks in the hospital followed by another month in cardiac rehabilitation. During that time, I visited twice more, brief visits where we were cordial but distant. He didn't bring up the apology again, and I didn't push. I was waiting to see what he'd do once he was home, once the immediate threat was past and he felt more like himself. The answer came quickly. Within 2 weeks of being home, according to Eric, Dad was back to his old patterns. Complaining about the doctors who didn't know what they were doing, criticizing Mom's cooking now that he was on a heart-healthy diet, and, most tellingly, starting to reframe the narrative of his hospital stay. He's telling people you refused to visit him, Eric reported. That you only came once, stayed 5 minutes, and made the whole thing about yourself. I felt the familiar anger rise but breathed through it. Of course he is. I corrected him. Told him you came 3 times, that you were respectful even though he didn't deserve it. He told me I was remembering it wrong. This was the pattern. Any moment of vulnerability or accountability would be walked back once he felt safe again. The hospital apology had been tactical, not genuine. He'd said what he needed to say to try to reel me back in, and when it didn't work, he'd return to the old playbook, playing victim, rewriting history, gathering sympathy. How are you handling it? I asked Eric. I'm tired, Vic. I'm tired of making excuses for him, tired of being in the middle, tired of pretending everything's fine when it's not. You don't have to be in the middle. You're allowed to have your own relationship with him, or not, independent of mine. I know. I think I'm finally starting to understand what you figured out a long time ago. I'd been offered the Pentagon position. It was a huge opportunity, a chance to influence policy and training at the highest levels. It meant relocating to Washington, D.C., which felt fitting. A fresh start, a geographical separation from the family drama. When I told Mom about it, her first response was, "That's so far away." "It's a 3-hour drive, Mom. And I'll visit when I can. Your father won't like it." "My father doesn't get a vote in my career decisions." She was quiet. Then, "He says you're running away." He would say that. The truth is I'm running towards something, a position I've earned, an opportunity to serve at a higher level. If he chooses to see that as running away from him, that's his issue, not mine. I wish things were different. So do I. But wishing doesn't change anything. Dad had a year to show he could respect boundaries and treat me decently. He chose not to. The heart attack changed him. For about 2 weeks. Then he went right back to who he's always been. I moved to D.C. in August. Colonel Hayes, now a close friend, helped me find an apartment and navigate the Pentagon bureaucracy. The work was challenging, intense, and exactly what I needed. I was surrounded by people who valued competence, dedication, and results. My achievements spoke for themselves. I settled into a new community of military professionals and civilians who became a chosen family of sorts. Sunday dinners with colleagues, impromptu happy hours, professional relationships that evolved into genuine friendships. This was what family could be: people who showed up for each other, who celebrated successes without jealousy, who offered support without strings attached. Eric visited once, stayed a weekend, and marveled at my new life. "You seem happy." "Really happy." "I am." It turns out removing constant criticism and sabotage from your life is good for your mental health. Dad asks about you sometimes. Never directly to me. He asks Mom, who asks me, who doesn't know what to tell her. Tell her I'm doing well. Thriving, actually. And that I'm open to a relationship with both of them if they can respect my boundaries, but I'm not holding my breath. She misses you. She could call me. We could build something, the two of us. But she'd have to be willing to acknowledge that Dad's behavior was wrong and that her enabling played a role. So far, she hasn't been able to do that. At Thanksgiving, I volunteered at a local organization that provided meals to veterans experiencing homelessness. It felt more meaningful than sitting through another tense family dinner. I spent Christmas with Hayes and her family, welcomed like I'd always belonged there. New Year came and went. My second year in D.C. brought new responsibilities, a promotion to lieutenant colonel, and a sense of peace I'd never experienced before. I was building a life on my own terms, defined by my own values and achievements rather than by someone else's need to diminish me. In February, I received a letter from my father. Actual paper, in the mail. I almost threw it away without reading it, but curiosity won. The letter was short. He wrote that he'd been thinking about our last conversation, that he understood he'd hurt me, and that he wanted to do better. He asked if I'd be willing to talk, just the two of us, no audience, no pressure. I sat with that letter for a week. Talked it through in therapy, discussed it with Hayes, weighed the risks and potential benefits. Finally, I called him. "I got your letter. I meant what I said in it. Dad, you've meant things before. At the hospital, you apologized and then went right back to telling people lies about me. I know. I know I did. I was scared and angry and, look, I'm not good at this. At admitting I was wrong, at changing. But I'm trying to understand." "Understand what?" "Why you needed to cut me out." Eric tried to explain it to me. "Your mother too, though she doesn't want to admit her part in it." I didn't get it at first. I kept thinking you were being dramatic, ungrateful. But then I started paying attention to how I talk about you, and I realized I do what you said. I make everything smaller. I can't seem to help it. It was the most self-awareness I'd ever heard from him. "Why do you do it?" "Because when you succeed, it reminds me of all the ways I failed. And instead of being proud of you for doing better than I did, I try to drag you down to where I am. It's not right. It's not fair to you. But at least now I can see it." I didn't know what to say. This was more than I'd hoped for, more honesty than I'd thought him capable of. I'm not asking you to forgive me or to come home or to pretend nothing happened, he continued. I'm just asking if you'd be willing to try. Slowly. With those boundaries you talked about. I'll probably screw up again, but maybe if you call me on it, I can do better. Maybe, I said carefully. But Dad, if you do this, if we try to rebuild, and you sabotage me again, that's it. No more chances. I will not spend my life in this cycle. I understand. That's fair. We started small. Phone calls every few weeks, brief and surface level at first. He asked about my work, and instead of diminishing it, he asked questions. Sometimes I could hear him fighting the urge to make a cutting remark, wrestling with old habits. When he slipped, and he did, occasionally, I called him on it immediately, and he'd catch himself, apologize. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't the relationship I'd wanted as a child or even as a young adult. But it was honest, at least. And it had boundaries I was willing to enforce. 3 years after that ceremony where my father tried to destroy me in front of the town, I stood in a different room receiving a different honor. This time, it was at the Pentagon, a commendation for my work developing new training protocols that had significantly improved readiness and reduced training injuries across multiple units. The Assistant Secretary of Defense was presenting the award. I hadn't invited my family. I'd learned my lesson about mixing my professional achievements with my complicated personal relationships. But I did call my father the night before and told him about it. That's impressive, Victoria. Really impressive. What you've accomplished. Thank you. I know I'm not there, and I understand why. But I want you to know I'm proud of you. Not just for this, but for becoming who you are despite everything. It wasn't the eloquent apology or acknowledgement I might have scripted for him. But it was real, and it was his. I appreciate that, Dad. I've been thinking about that ceremony. The one where I said those things. I went still. We'd never directly discussed it since that hospital visit years ago. Okay, I can't take it back. I can't undo it. But I want you to know that I see now what I did. I tried to take your moment of honor and make it about my own insecurity and meanness. And I'm sorry. Really sorry. Thank you for saying that. Eric showed me that newspaper article about you from last year. The one about women in military leadership. You didn't mention me in that one either. No, I didn't. I don't blame you. If I were writing my story, I wouldn't include me either. Not the version of me from back then. It was painful and honest and more than I'd expected. Dad, I don't hate you. I never did. I just couldn't keep letting you hurt me. I know. And you were right to protect yourself. I'm trying to be someone worth including in your story now. Even if it's too late. It's not too late. It's just different. We talked for a while longer, the conversation easier than it had been in years. When we hung up, I felt something shift, not forgiveness exactly, but a lessening of the weight I'd carried. The ceremony the next day was everything the first one should have been. Professional, respectful, celebratory. Colleagues I admired watched as the assistant secretary spoke about the impact of my work. Colonel Hayes was there, beaming with pride. Other officers I'd mentored over the years had come to show support. At the reception afterward, a young captain approached me. Ma'am, I wanted to thank you. The training protocol you developed probably saved my life deployed last year. We were better prepared because of your work. That meant more than any medal. That was the real measure of my career, the lives protected, the soldiers who went home safe because of programs I'd helped create. Hayes found me as the reception was winding down. You should be proud. What you've built here, Victoria. It matters. I am proud. For the first time in my life, I'm proud of myself without waiting for someone else's approval to make it real. That's growth right there. That evening, my phone buzzed with messages. Eric sent a photo of a news clip about the ceremony that had made it into the military press. Dad saw this. He printed it out and put it on his refrigerator. It was such a small thing. A printed news clip on a refrigerator. But it represented a change, a shift in how my father related to my achievements. He wasn't trying to claim credit or minimize it. He was simply acknowledging it, being proud in the way parents are supposed to be proud. Mom called the next day. Our relationship had slowly improved, though it would never be what it might have been if she'd chosen differently all those years. I saw the article. That's wonderful, honey. Thanks, Mom. Your father has been different lately. Have you noticed? We've been talking more. It's been better. He told me what he said at that ceremony years ago. Really talked about it, acknowledged how horrible it was. I never realized. I mean, I knew it was bad, but I don't think I let myself understand how much he hurt you over the years. No, you didn't. You chose not to see it because seeing it would have meant you had to do something about it. She was quiet. Then, you're right. I'm sorry, Victoria. I'm sorry I didn't protect you. I'm sorry I asked you to be patient with him instead of asking him to be better to you. I'm sorry it took losing you for me to understand what I'd done. It was the apology I'd needed from her. Not perfect, but honest. Thank you for saying that. It means a lot. Can I ask you something? Of course. Do you think you'll ever come home for a holiday? Not necessarily staying with us, I know that's probably too much. But maybe dinner, or just stopping by. I considered it. The old fear was still there, the worry that going back would mean falling into old patterns, that proximity would erode the boundaries I'd fought so hard to establish. But I was stronger now. I'd built a life that couldn't be undermined by a few hours in my hometown. Maybe Thanksgiving. Maybe I could drive up for the day. But Dad and I would need to talk beforehand, establish some ground rules. He'd agree to that. He misses you, Victoria. We both do. After we hung up, I sat on my balcony and watched the sun set over the city. In the distance, I could see the Pentagon, the physical representation of how far I'd come. Not just in rank or responsibility, but in understanding my own worth. For years, I'd believed my father's narrative about me. That I was lucky, not skilled. That my achievements were inflated or undeserved. That I was fundamentally flawed in ways that only he could see. Breaking free of that narrative had been the hardest work of my life, harder than any deployment or training evolution. But I'd done it. I'd built a life based on reality, the reality of my service record, my contributions, the respect of my peers. The reality that I was good at what I did, that I'd earned every rank and recognition through competence and dedication. My father's voice no longer defined me. His approval or disapproval no longer had the power to shake my foundation. He was just a man, flawed, insecure, capable of cruelty, but also, maybe, of growth. And I was just his daughter, strong, accomplished, worthy of respect whether he gave it or not. The sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. Tomorrow I'd go back to work, continue the mission, keep building on what I'd created. And someday, maybe, I'd drive home for Thanksgiving and sit at a table with my family and it would be okay. Not perfect, but okay. Because I'd learned that you can't fix broken people. You can only protect yourself from the damage they cause and build something better. And if they choose to do their own work, to face their flaws and try to change, you can decide whether to let them back in. Carefully. With boundaries. With your eyes open. I'd built my life on courage under fire, not just the literal fire of combat, but the fire of family dysfunction, of emotional warfare, of standing up for myself when it would have been easier to keep accepting mistreatment. That took its own kind of bravery. The Purple Heart sits on a shelf in my office now, next to other commendations and photos of my soldiers. It reminds me not just of the day I was wounded in combat, but of the day I stood in that room while my father tried to destroy me and the truth stood anyway. Respect isn't given or taken by rumor. It's earned by what we do, by how we show up, by the lives we touch, and the work we complete. My father tried to rewrite my story, but he couldn't. The truth was too strong, too well documented, too real. And I no longer let anyone rewrite that. Not my father, not anyone. This is my story, built on my terms, defined by my choices. And it's a story I'm proud of. Thanks for listening. If this hit home, tap like, subscribe, and share it with someone who needs a push to set boundaries. Drop a comment. Have you ever been publicly undermined by family? What did you do in the moment? What's one boundary you need to set this week? Should I keep limited contact with my father or cut ties completely? Why? If you were in that ceremony, what would you have said to him? Your stories help others feel less alone. I'm reading every comment.